Um, Good afternoon, everyone. Hope I'm audible. Hello, just hear one voice.
Yes,
Yes, you are.
we can
We
hear
can
you,
hear
sir.
you.
Okay, thank you very much.
We can hear you.
Once again, good afternoon, everyone. And I also hear that quite a number of persons try to join. I think the secretary was looking at the maximum of 100, but now we have quite a number of persons. But I think, please, we may just try to inform others that are unable to join. We are also live on Facebook. As at the last count, we probably had close to 300 or 400 people. Thought we have less than 100. But having said that, thanks for coming, and we hope you are going to enjoy the training. So I'll be speaking on research methodology for policymakers. My name is Afolabi Olowookere. I head, along with my colleagues, these establishments, and I think we have enough information about what we do. So I'll be speaking about research and research methodology. I'll be speaking about research process. We will look at academic versus policy research. Academic research is very useful. I'm sure a number of academics are on this call, and as well as a number of policymakers and business owners. So we can see how we can bring all these things together. I will look at type of research, policy research. What are the triggers of policy research? What are the features? What are the stages? And then what are some factors to consider? There are many factors to consider in any research for that matter. We'll look at some of them that are relevant for policy research. Then we'll single out about two of them, literature review and some analytical techniques. Then we'll try to summarize. So research, I have this very long definition, but please bear with me, but I think it's very useful to go this long route. We can say research is a scientific inquiry into a phenomenon to generate new knowledge, validate existing knowledge, or solve a problem. So we are either generating a new knowledge, or we are validating existing knowledge, and or solving a problem. But that has to be done through a systematic and orderly collection, organization, and analysis of information or data. Of course, when data is processed, it becomes information. And the ultimate goal of making the finding useful in decision making. So there are research that we may do now that we may not use them in decision making, but that doesn't mean that they can't be useful in decision making in the future. There are many features of research. Research has to be systematic, that is structured in a way, and then it has to be creative, it has to be replicable, it has to be objective, and to some extent empirical. Empirical doesn't mean that it has to always be quantitative, but at least in some ways it has to be the way that you can validate rather than an ad hoc system. And research can be applied, it can be basic, it can be policy research. For the purpose of our lecture today, we'll be looking at policy research. What then is research methodology? As we said, research is a methodical system of inquiry. Then methodology is the explanation of how a researcher intends to carry out his or her research. The approach is such that it has to ensure that it is reliable, there is valid results that address the research aims and objectives. And then we have to start looking at the process of collecting data, how, where, from who, in what form, and what type of analysis is relevant to the kind of work that we want to do. This is something that talks about research process. It's a chart that I've always found very useful in the last 2 decades. Most research will start from formulating a research problem. A number of research problems that we formulate can arise from the literature. Some of them may arise because of interest, and some of them may arise because of a problem, existing problem, especially when it comes to policy making. They probably are not just literature, which can be theoretical. They are existing problems that the policymaker has identified. Then as a result of that, you then probably initiate a research process. In academics, you can actually start a research, formulate a research problem from just by mere shifting the academic or knowledge frontier, which can be lightly theoretical. But for a policymaker, you want something that can easily be applied. Then we'll start talking about how do we consider
Please, the voice is gone. You can't hear anything again.
There like that. It's not a problem. When you fix it there, then you print out the page to be signed.
Apologies for that.
Yes.
So I will share my...
when Dr. Boris signs that part, that take.
Okay, so am I audible again? Apologies, I think the network. No.
Yes.
Hello.
You can go ahead, sir.
Okay.
Yes,
thank
we
you very
can.
much. So
you can go ahead.
We conceptualize the research design, then we can then start talking about constructing an instrument for data collection.
Yes,
data collection is a very interesting part of research. We can it can be secondary, it can be primary, depending on the type of work we are make use of. If they are not available, the researcher may have to design an instrument by himself or herself to collect the data. If you then decide to collect the data yourself, even when it's secondary data, you must then look for a way to select a sample, write your research proposal that will show some of the procedure of what you have done so far. You then go ahead to collect the data. There are many ways of collecting the data. Before now, people will say collect data, questionnaire, face-to-face interview. But these days, things have changed. There are a lot of things that can call data for you in different places. There are existing data that you can leverage. There are technologies that can assist you to gather data more easily than before. Then you start talking about how to code the data. The process of cleaning and coding the data can be very involved. Expertise are also required in this area. Then you analyze your data. There are many ways of analyzing data, whether it's qualitative or quantitative. And when it's quantitative, there's also so many ways of analyzing data. Nobody can know them all, but what is important is to at least be an expert in one or two, then use them and then leverage another capacity others may have in order to achieve what you want to do. Then you can then write your research report. So having said that, we can then look at what is the role of academic and policy research in policy analysis. When I've been in 1989, they tried to compare academic research with policy research and policy analysis. They show that academic research focuses on constructing and testing theories for the purpose of understanding society, using rigorous methods to find the truth. So the truth is in inverted comma. I mean, it's difficult to know what is the truth, but in academic research, you actually want to get that truth. And then you use your theories, robust methodology, rigorous method to test the theories and look for what is actually the truth in a replicable manner. Policy research can be described as a practice of trying to analyze the effects of public policy on projects already in place. So not necessarily leaning on very rigorous theory or methodologies, but trying to say, how do we analyze the effect of public policy? Government has a new policy. Government has a budget, for instance. Government has restriction on forex or exchange or trade. What would be the effect of that? Then policy analysis would then be the systematic comparison of policy alternative to inform a decision with a short-term window. So most times, for policy analysis, you have a short-term window. You go through the rigor of the academic research. You are dealing with the present public policy problems, but you then must find a way to synthesize academic and policy research so that you can compare alternatives, learning from peer countries, and then be able to inform the decision maker. So sometimes these are housed directly within government offices. And these days, as many private institutions also find research to be very useful to what they do, they are also setting up research departments or units. So let's just look at some distinction between academic and policy research. In academic research, questions tend to be more conceptual, whereas in policy, they tend to be more practical. Academic research seeks to add to the larger body of knowledge. So you want to say in the world or in Africa, this is about the first time somebody is probing or inquiring into this issue, or using this methodology, or getting this kind of results. For a policymaker, it doesn't have to be the first time. In fact, you even want many people to have done it so that you can learn from them. You want to find solutions to immediate and specific problems. So the problem is immediate and is specific. So most times you don't have the luxury of looking at what has been done everywhere in the world before you can establish a gap and things like that. Academic research can take more time to complete, while applied research, because it's immediate, you want it to be complete. Your CEO calls you and says, what is the impact of this? And you say, we have to write a proposal, we have to go and do decision review, we have to develop a methodology, we have to, then he will just close his book and smile and say, you can come back next time, you know. Academics spend time to establish what is already known. It's already known, but academics try to say, let's probe it further. Has it changed? Whereas in applied research, you want to, there are specific questions. Academic tends to be theoretically focused, explicit in steps and procedures. You spend a lot of time in developing the methodology, in gathering the data, but you don't have that luxury when it comes to apply or policy research. In academic research, findings are often made public, but in policy research, you hardly make them public. Of course, that doesn't mean that they are not made public. If a government, sometimes organizations do a lot of research within that they don't show out, because if they show them, it can also be very interesting in terms of the response. And more so when you even go to private sector, they do a lot of research within the organization, maybe to improve on their performance, and they will never show you that kind of results. So you may not really know whether they are even doing anything research, but they do. Academic research usually spark questions and ideas for future research. They are evaluated through peer-reviewed, and they are shared through scholarly journals, academic conferences. When it comes to applied research or policy research, they tend to be organizational focused. They don't want to solve all the problems in the world. It's a particular problem the organization is facing. They are flexible and situational. They can change their methodology depending on the situation at hand. Their findings are usually kept private, and then results are used internally for decision and strategy, and then they are evaluated by client organization or industry standard rather than share it widely. What are the types of policy research? We can identify four. The first one is surveillance or monitoring. This is designed to systematically and constantly track development in the economy and society, with a view to identifying potential opportunities and challenges well in advance of their emergence, and then to design appropriate policies and programs to effectively deal with the situation. Evaluative, to analyze and evaluate impact of specific policies and programs against the background of the intended effects. You have to then look at what is intended, what is unintended in this, and then be able to compare and evaluate a particular project or intervention of government. That can be done ex post or ex ante. Ex post because it's after the program. Ex ante, even before the program, you can start evaluating the policy of government of a decision maker. It can also be prognostic, which is designed to analyze the development in the relevant aspects of the economy and society at regular intervals. The view is to predict the future direction the system may take under alternative circumstances. And it can be prospective, when you want to look at development in the relevant aspect of the economy at regular intervals. The aim is that you want to predict the future. What will the system be under different possible circumstances, especially those that are outside the control of the policymaker. So when we talk about applied research or policy research, they can be surveillance or monitoring, they can be evaluative, they can be prognostic, and they can be prospective. What trigger policy research? About 4 triggers can be identified. Number 1, it can be demand-driven. The policymaker himself or herself can act a researcher or a research institution or a think tank or an in-house research unit to look at a particular issue. It can be supply-driven, often unsolicited, interest-driven, agenda-driven, maybe by CSO, maybe by a trade union or a business organization, which has a particular interest. They may want to lobby, then they do a research in a particular area, maybe to point to government that this is a better way of doing what you are doing or the impact of what you have done so far. It can be purposive, which is associated with a specific issue of action from the beginning to the end. So you build it into a particular system so that you can see what is happening over time. And it can be accidental. This is where a lot of academic research assists policy research. It's unintended adaptation of regular research to policy needs or proceed, teasing out policy implication from a study or thesis. So a university undergraduates or university graduate students or a researcher can do a study unintended, and then they later find a policy implication, maybe today or tomorrow or later in the future of such a work. So it's accidental. You may pick a research work of a student and be able to show that, oh, this can solve some of the problem, even though it's not demand-driven, it's not supplied, nobody asks for it, it's not even targeted at government, it's not purposive, but he has done a study, but it's finding a lot of policy relevance. And I think we've seen this in a number of countries. And
I can't hear anything again, sir.
I think the voice is gone again. I think it's network.
They are pragmatic. In other words, they show us what will work and what will not work, and they provide practical recommendation. They are to specify the needs to be addressed at every stage. So most times they show details. So you don't just lump things up. For instance, economists, for instance, are very interesting when we do a lot of analysis. In regression, a lot of things are hidden, and the policymakers say, so what? You've brought so many countries together. Which of them do I behave towards? But so it's a panel of study. We have run the regression. This is the impact. But how does it affect me? What should I do first? How? When? Policy research will ask some of those questions. You try to move away from abstraction to real life action. That is a very difficult thing. I mean, for some of us on this call, we know this in academics. You just say government should finance agriculture. That's a big problem for a policymaker. How? The level of financing that I'm doing now, what is wrong with it? Where? How do I get the finance? What is the trade-off? Who should I finance less, given that there's a budget constraint? And what is the cost of capital? So many issues need to be answered for a policymaker. It has to be effectively communicated. That is a very important point. I will mention that later. And it also has to be tailored according to the needs of the policymaker. Before policymaker will actually listen to you, even when you do a very interesting research, if it's not according to the need and expectation of a policymaker, regardless of how beautiful it is, of course, they can still be on the shelf for another person to pick up in the future. But in these days where so many research are being published everywhere, it's possible for a good work to be lost in the crowd. They are fast-paced, there's little time, needs quick thinking and quick action. I was working in a place and there was Ebola, and the policymaker just said, what would be the impact of Ebola on the economy of the country? Wow, that's a big one. That will require me building a CGE. That will, I mean, quite a number of interesting things. But the executive doesn't have time for that. It's just interested in what is the impact. And can you give me the impact in the next 1 hour? Academic research, it will take me about a year or 6 months to do. But policy research, the CEO wants the results in a day. So for policy research or for a research work to be adopted as useful for a policymaker, the researcher should acknowledge the power and the challenges that are faced by the policymaker. What do we mean by that? The researcher is not the king. the policymaker is the king, right? Whether it's respected or not, is the one that calls the shot. The researcher has the tool, but when you do a good work, it must also be properly communicated, presented, and the language must not be confrontational, the one that makes the policymaker. And sometimes the policymaker reads the first paragraph and he forgets about the whole work that would have changed the country. So it's also important to do justice to the country, do justice to the policymaker as well as that sector by making sure that the language, presentation are done without necessarily reducing the professionalism in that research, but ensuring that it's well communicated. Stages of policy research. We can identify about 3 stages: negotiation stage, analytical stage, and communication stage. At the negotiation stage, this is where knowledge needs to be shared to agree and avoid discrepancies. Timeline and relevance of the research are also specified. There is a common ground to be established between the researcher and the policymaker. The researcher needs to have a clear understanding of the needs and expectations of policymakers, building a relationship, and then clarifying policy issues to be addressed and posing the research problem. You see, this negotiation stage, we cannot emphasize it enough. Often, the researcher has at the back of the mind the way things should be done. Maybe following from ways they've been done in other jurisdictions or the way he has done it before. And then also, once you are knowledgeable in something, you become an expert, then you probably think the policymaker doesn't understand. But often, the policymaker may not understand your tools, but he or she understands the entire sector, the process, and a lot of nuances that you may not understand. So it's always very important to sit down. The researcher is probably to fine-tune the ideas of the policymaker. In fact, most times, when you sit down with a lot of policymakers, initially you wonder what are they saying, but after many years, you start respecting them in terms of the knowledge. But all you just realize is that you can put their knowledge and experience down in a more coherent and consistent manner. But that doesn't mean that that knowledge is not deriving from them. So you must also listen to them. And then you must also understand their expectations. So for some of us that have worked in government think tanks or work in government agencies or work with CEOs of our organizations, we have a different idea of how things should be done, but they insist on something. But by the time you work with them with what they want, you later find out that you have also learned. So negotiation stage is always very important. There can be back and forth. Some of them can be so particular about just a comma or particular about the way you specify, write a language that you just think it doesn't really matter, but they think it matters, but you just have to understand them so that your research can be useful to them. There's the analytical stage, which is the core research. Gather data, survey, interview, analyze data, address the objective of the study. In other words, making what you have heard at the negotiation stage, making it empirical or making it as much objective as possible. And then the last one is the communication stage. The findings must be presented to the policymaker. And this is not just presentation, it's more of engagement and dialogue. They will have their own way of saying, no, the way you have written this is not totally correct. You have not painted us in a good light, but do you want me to change? No, not necessarily, but is there another language so that it doesn't show that this organization is not doing anything at all? So you just have to learn the language and things like that for a policymaker to then like you in terms of what you do. You must be able to convince the policymaker on the applicability and relevance of the recommendations. Otherwise, they must see themselves in the recommendation, and it must be something that they think are practicable, because they are always asking the question, how do I apply this? Not just writing it, not just saying government should ensure that infrastructures are provided. How? Those are some of the issues that the policymaker wants to hear. Executive summary is always very useful, very useful. Documents can be very bulky, but we must be able to show them summary that represent in a truthful, concise, methodical, and objective manner the entire documents, so that they can be pointed to the right section, and then it makes their life very easy. They are quite busy. Then, analysis of alternative scenarios. Policymakers like that. What are the things that are likely to happen? if I do this, if I do that. But also, one has to be careful. You can't just present different scenario without making a recommendation on one, because at the end of the day, they can even be more confused than they started. Then you have to say, what are the policy outcomes? What are the factors to consider in policy research analysis? Many of them, literature review, data analytics, quite a number of things to be considered. But for the purpose of this masterclass, we will just focus on two, which are literature and data analytical techniques. There are so many, but we just focus on two for the purpose of this class. Literature review is the compilation, classification, and evaluation of what other researchers have written on a particular topic. Whether you are doing academic research, which is often basic, or sometimes academic can be applied, or you are doing pure policy research or policy analysis. Policy analysis may not really do too much literature review, but for policy research, you will still do some policy for literature review. You need to, no matter, it depends on the scope of the work. Some you may have to do a lot of literature, combing every literature that is available in that area. For some, you may just have to have leading literature here and there, but you must look at what others have done. You may want to establish frontier of knowledge, often for academics. You may want to seek clarity to display understanding of an issue. Sometimes if you don't read, you think all ideas are your ideas. You need to learn how a body of research has evolved in some cases. You may want to identify previous approaches to studying an issue. There is a particular issue. How have others? For instance, Nigeria, most times, if you want to compare Nigeria, in Africa, you will probably be talking of in East Africa, Kenya, South Africa, Southern Africa, South Africa, Egypt in the North Africa. West Africa, no one is as big, but maybe Ghana, at least relatively. Outside Africa, you want to see what is happening in Indonesia, what is happening in Brazil, what is happening in Malaysia. Especially some of them have oil and that are federal system. So you probably want to see how have they been doing these kind of things in the past. You want to see whether there are areas of convergence and divergence in the literature, so that if you are speaking in a particular way and somebody comes and says, no, you are not looking at it very well, you won't start being defensive. You would have known what exists. You want to have intellectual context and motivation for what you are doing. Then you also want to situate your research and contribution among others. Often, you identify the research issue, you do the literature search, you evaluate the relevant materials, you analyze and review the literature, you classify the literature, you review and discuss them, you draw your conclusion, and you do a final review. What is very common these days is for people to not to do literature review, but what I call literature statement. Just as stating this person has found out that, this person has found out that. I mean, it doesn't mean anything. What matters is in what context, what are the issue, how thematic are what you are saying in the area of bringing out a particular issue that is germane towards realizing the objective of your work, rather than stating what people have found out everywhere. Success factors is always important to look at credentials of the writers, their background, what is the quality of the journal or the platform where such information are published, very important. Evidence-based research and objectivity by author, you have to know, you must have read wide before you can say this person is relatively more objective. Everybody is subjective in one form or the other, but there are things that will show that what is the interest of this person and is arguing in that area, it probably may be less objective than others. What are the conclusions that the person is deriving from the data? There are people that just present data, but they draw another conclusion from the data, but they make it in a logical way that you would have forgotten about the data. So you must also be able to say, is this saying what the data is saying? Convincing and plausible arguments offered. What are the kind of arguments that the person is offering? Are they plausible? What are the consensus among different authors? We have different authors in different ways. How are people arguing on this particular issue? Then author's contribution to understanding the issue of interest. And please, in whatever you do, try not to plagiarize. It's a very big problem. I'm sure this session is not on plagiarism. Maybe if you have time, one day we'll speak about citation and plagiarism. Use your own ideas. If it's not your own idea, quote your sources. Otherwise, you are plagiarizing. Many people plagiarize. It's understandable, but we shouldn't plagiarize. Otherwise, I mean, people have written speeches for their CEO, for their executive directors, and those things are plagiarized. Plagiarizing others and plagiarizing self. You say, oh, I've heard this thing before. The man has said the same thing before. So we have to be very careful when we do that. The other issue is analytical techniques in research. I said there are many issues to consider. We are looking at literature and analytical techniques in research. These days, we have so much data. They say data is the new oil. And I think that's one of the things that we're also doing at PDSR. We believe data is the new oil. Most times, others, international organizations, international market data vendors, international data providers have shown us that they are the one that can possess the ability to gather our data, do it for them. But we can do it here also. Given the volume of data that are generated globally these days, it's very difficult to have a policy research now without even mentioning anything about data. I mean, look at some shop like a place like ShopRite and the rest, or other big shops that generate a lot of data. Some of the data can be used, very useful in merger and acquisition analysis when people try to do sensitivity of price control, whether somebody should match with another person, because they are real-time data that have been used in other places around the world. But we are still learning. A lot of things are done in academics, but in policy space, they can still make better use of data. So policy research requires some analytical techniques which are used to induce underlying inference from data. We can classify them into 4 in that order. They can be descriptive, diagnostics, predictive, and prescriptive. The more their complexity, the more the value that they bring to the table. But that still doesn't mean that the more they are relevant, because for a particular policy analysis or policy research, a descriptive analysis may suffice. Why for some, you may need a prescriptive analytics to be able to solve the problem. But for a policymaker, you can't then bore him with detail of what you have done, which at best can be in a technical notes or in an appendix somewhere, but you must be able to show what is the relevance of any method that you are using. So if it's descriptive analysis, it's just what happened. It's always the first step. You have to assess the data, often historical. It's used to answer the fundamental question of what happened, looks at the events of the past and tries to identify specific patterns with the data. So what is the pattern in this data over time? Exchange rate in Nigeria, Nigerian trade, Nigeria imports wheat from what country? What has been the pattern over years? Are we producing wheat enough? Do we have research institutes that can help us produce wheat or research into wheat production? What has been the impact of that on price of bread over time? These are some of the questions just to describe. You order, you manipulate, and interpret raw data from various sources. It allows us to present our data in a meaningful way, making our data organized and ready for further analysis. It's often used a basic description of the data like charts, tables, and other basic descriptive statistics. They are basic. They tell us what happened. They may be enough to address a research issue, but they are always first step in most research work. Diagnostics. Why did it happen? So now that we have known what happened, why did it happen? This will build on the descriptive techniques to allow the question, why did it happen? Here we drill down into the data to understand patterns and factors that can explain why things happen. It gives an in-depth insight looking at the causal relationship in our data. With analytics primarily use likelihoods, probability, distribution of outcomes. We can have some data mining, correlation analysis, regression analysis, and things like that that will tell us what happened. What are the factors that can predict Nigeria current account balance? What are the factors that can predict whether there will be domestic violence? These are why do they happen? Predictives, what is likely to happen? So we want to know the forces, what happened, Why did it happen? What is likely to happen? Now that we know why it happened, we can then say, what is then likely to happen? We can predict which action should be achieved, should achieve a desired result. We can use regression analysis, several multivariate analysis, pattern matching, predictive modeling, and forecasting. Here we use large volume of data, deep understanding of statistics and programming language can be useful. The last one is prescriptive analysis. What should now be done? What happened? Why did it happen? What is likely to happen? Now that we know what is likely to happen, what should be done? It is most complex and often require that analysis at the first 3 stages are accurate. So if you don't do the good analysis at the first 3 stages, you may not be able to do a good justice to this. We can use graph analysis, simulation, complex event processing, neural network, machine learning, and things like that. Artificial intelligence, we can do scenario analysis, then we can do a lot of optimization techniques. There are many analytical tools that are available depending on your requirement as an organization, the expertise that you have. Do you want something that you use programming or point and click? Do you have a need for visualization? The nature and volume of data that is collected, then pricing and licensing. Some of them are free, some of them you have to get licensing. Excel is very useful. It's always been very useful. It looks very simple, but it's used for almost 80% of analysis. Tableau is useful. Power BI these days for representation, visualization. Packaging like SPSS, SAS, Theta, eViews, HAL, Python, SQL, they are useful. There are thousands of them. Nobody can know them all depending on your interest. So let me summarize. Research is a methodical system of inquiry. The methodology is an explanation of how a researcher will conduct his research. A policy researcher needs to understand and apply the process from formulating a research problem to producing a research report. Academic and policy research are reinforcing, they support each other, but while the former tends to be conceptual, the latter is more practical. We need policy research to monitor, evaluate, predict, and create scenarios about development in society. Such research can be commissioned by policymakers or they can be extracted from academic research. A researcher working for policymakers needs to possess a clear understanding of the policymaker's need and expectation and communicate in an acceptable manner. Among several other factors to consider in policy research are the issue of analytical techniques. Why one needs to review relevant literature to give a guide to study, one should cite appropriately and avoid plagiarism. There are many analytical tools and applied for descriptive analysis, diagnostic analysis, for predictive analysis, as well as for prescriptive analysis. We hope that you find all this useful in our policy.